Hello, how are you? I just wanted to say thank you very much for your continued support of the Cloud Therapist channel. There's lots more content coming soon, so please stay in touch. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. This is the September 2023 episode of Cloud State of Play. As always, I have the fabulous Paul Bevan with me. Yes, he's back for more punishment. Paul is the Director of Infrastructure Research at Bloor Research. So let's say hello to Paul. Paul, how are you doing?
I am very well and ready for my punishment session yet again. It's lovely, yeah.
And this
People will begin to talk, yes.
Yeah, and it's changing weather as well. We're kind of entering into the autumn, kind of seeing some fog around where I live and things like that. So yeah, interesting stuff. Okay, so for this particular episode, we've decided again to focus on three topics, and they are as follows. So Oracle and Microsoft tie the knot. Interesting stuff. So there's a partnership happening or has been announced by Oracle and Microsoft, and we'll dive into that a little bit more and kind of explore the impact of that. The second one is a roadmap report from Gartner. It's called the Technology Adoption Roadmap. So Paul and I are going to be exploring some of the information on that, and then maybe point you to the reports. You can kind of go into a bit more detail for yourselves as well. And the third one, Paul wanted to explore this particular question, and that question is, could AI break the cloud? So that's going to be an interesting one. I can't wait to see what Paul's thoughts are. I've probably got a few of my own, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so let's get cracking, Paul. Let's go into the first one, which is the Oracle and Microsoft partnership that was announced recently. I think it was only this past week, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. One of a long stream, I think, of legacy vendors all looking to tie up some sort of relationship in the cloud. But yeah. This one looks sort of quite specific, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I read a report on the register, as I sometimes do, and one of the quotes I picked up on, which I think was kind of quite interesting and may kind of connect with other announcements in the past. It said Oracle's cloud hardware that's used to basically run databases in Oracle's own cloud will be placed in Microsoft Azure's data centers. So it's not just kind of yes, you have our blessing to run Oracle database applications in the cloud, and we'll sort out all the licensing that we used to hold customers hostage on in the past, but we're actually going to put some of the hardware over the fence as well in Azure. So that was the interesting sentence that I picked up from that. What was kind of your take on that, on the announcement?
My take on the announcement was almost along the lines of it was sort of some of the HPC type stuff that I think was concerning everybody. And therefore, how do they sort this out? So the issue, I think, as much for Microsoft and for Oracle, is the cost of moving data in and out of the cloud. And if you're using Oracle databases and you're using sort of HPC and AI training and all those sort of issues, then I think it makes sense to put it, put that where it's most effective, and you're not going to be shifting huge amounts of data outside the data center. I think there's one or two other things in play, but specific point, I came across somebody on a session I was on last week, and he was some sort of IT operations lead at a UK company, and they were doing training of their AI training systems. And we used to doing it on Azure, and it was being throttled. He wasn't quite sure whether it was throttling from Azure themselves or whether it was the network being throttled just for whatever reason. And he's made, and he's had to make some interesting decisions based on that. And the other issue, I think, so I think there's a challenge for people saying, how do we do this in the cloud? If I'm going to have to keep shunting data backwards and forwards, isn't it better to get everything there? So I think putting Oracle databases up in the cloud and rather than transferring data out to Azure every time probably makes a whole heap of sense. And I think there are other issues too about just getting hold of the technology. I think there's going to be a squeeze on some of the technologies that are under pressure from a sort of the situation with China, new chip designs, all those sort of things. I think having Oracle systems in there as well maybe alleviate some of those problems.
Yeah.
From Oracle's point of view, they probably see it as, hey, this is a wonderful sort of marketing tool for us. Good luck with that. I think it's all I can say. You are grabbing a tiger by the tail, and at some point the tiger turns around and eats you. And on this occasion, I think Azure and AWS, people like that, are likely the tiger, not Oracle. In the old days, if you'd gone in, a smaller company in with Oracle, you said Oracle's the tiger.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's some dangers for them, particularly if their mindset is wrong about it. Then that needs to be right.
Yeah, so I think the solution of the product's called Oracle Database at Azure. So just make sure that Oracle is still in there in the title. It's not it's not kind of Azure leading with the title. I think is the aim of that. And the idea, I think, at least in some of the sort of press releases and the news that I've read, is to kind of reduce the latency between applications in Azure and Oracle databases. I mean, yes, I can appreciate that, and that might be a kind of a response to what maybe customers have been complaining about. But ideally, I'd rather actually move the data out of Oracle, altogether. And there's so much more, options out there to explore, and enterprises should be really looking at that when they move to cloud.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of the topics that you and I want to cover somewhere down the track.
We will,
databases and the new types of databases that are available. I've been looking at the way Oracle database is being used in certain of the areas I work on, like IT operations, and you look at the sort of capturing of data. And when you think about other types of databases that's much better at doing that sort of alerting and whether it's time series or it's graph databases, and you think trying to do that in Oracle is expensive, not very agile, because you're actually having, Oracle did relational databases great, but in today's world, trying to, map what you need to do today in terms of relationships into an Oracle database is very time consuming. So the pressure, I think, is the danger for Oracle is that they put it in there and everybody says, hey, it's a great way of getting it off and into something else. So I think they really are taking a risk there.
Yeah, I mean, I underlined sort of the word latency, which was in the most of the kind of the stuff that I read. So yes, fair enough for that. But whether this whole thing is actually the right strategy is another. And I think apparently they did something similar last year as well. Again, according to the Register report that I read. But it was called a so-called integration at that point. So kind of an interconnect. I guess that wasn't fast enough. I was saying, no, we have to actually put the hardware on the other side of the fence. That's, I think, the only way to fix those customer problems, latency problems. So,
I mean, we talk about latency, across the wide area network.
Yeah.
But again, you can get latency, inside large data centers, and so actually putting them and maybe close connecting them together, that's a way forward. But it's sort of an odd one, because you just think at some point you're going to say, well, there's much cheaper and better ways of doing this than putting it on an Oracle database.
And just to we'll kind of maybe pin that, and we'll just come back to that. But I mean, just as we talked about, and you mentioned sort of time series and graph databases. Time series, graph, vector now kind of quite high on the sort of AI ML sort of agenda, dealing with things like more the relationships between the data, mathematically representing the data rather than the data itself, and so on. And those are all new ways to explore how we can, not just store the data, but the format that is stored in, so that actually when it comes to retrieval, it makes it easier and it's more versatile in terms of how we can, not just how we can retrieve it, but where we can retrieve it into. Where is it coming back to? Do we, is it kind of coming back into an application? Is it, going to be, and what that application is? And I think those are all new, ways of storing and processing and retrieving the data.
Yeah, it's very much, and again, I'm not an Oracle database expert. Relational databases have had their place and their role, but they've always tended to be part of a monolithic system. And of course, most of the stuff you do in the cloud is distributed. It's not a monolithic system.
Yes.
The whole basis of it, and therefore, and back to the sort of agility piece, it's quite difficult. I mean, Oracle's are a remarkable database, but my goodness me, it takes some operational control to manage it and update it. It's the updating of it as you put some new item in that requires a database reorg. You think, jeepers, new databases. Now, maybe Oracle have addressed some of those issues, but you have to say they're coming from behind the curve on that, probably.
Yeah, and let's learn the licensing and the support that kind of goes with that. I was speaking to somebody who's from a database vendor recently, and they said, one of the things that, for example, Graph does, and I won't dwell on it too long, but just kind of very briefly, is that because it's focused on the relationship between the data, we've kind of taken what used to be, let's say, in the marketing person's head and actually put it into the database. Because previously you were applying an action to the data because you knew that's what you wanted to do, to maybe correlate the names and addresses, or the name of a customer with all the films that they stream from your service, that type of stuff. But that action of correlating was actually in somebody's head, right? Whereas now we're actually storing that relationship, so we don't have to kind of keep it in our heads or for somebody to come up with that idea. The relationship is being created and it's being stored, and it can be explored straight away.
Yeah,
so that's a kind of a difference.
Yeah, it is different, and of course in Oracle you can make those relationships, but you have to make each individual one individually.
Exactly,
and it's really difficult when you do.
It's really tough. Yeah, and RDBMS, as you said, it's kind of, for me, it's a fading era. That sort of name, address, telephone number, name, address, telephone number, name, address, that kind of thing is really we need to move away from that, I think.
Yeah. Agreed. So it's an interesting move from Oracle, but it sort of highlights some of the other legacy vendors who've sort of done similar things, not quite the same way. I mean, VMware clearly have gone down a route. I mean, they famously, vCloud Air, they just sold that to OVH Cloud. And thinking that OVH Cloud could go and sort of market it for them. And OVH Cloud probably thought they'd get a whole load of marketing support from VMware to support that. And the answer is neither of those things really happened very well. And of course, VMware then went and did all sorts of deals with AWS and Azure and GCP to put VMware into their environments. So it's and you wonder what they think they're getting out of it, because once you go there, are you expecting AWS to do an awful lot of marketing for you? The answer is they might do a little bit, but the reality is not very much. And people are going to look at it and go, well, why would I do that there? Why wouldn't I just use a native tool? All those sort of issues. And because ultimately, and this comes back to something that we've touched in the past, is if you simply take existing legacy applications and run them in the cloud, is it going to be cost effective? And my take is generally not.
Generally not. It's a lift and shift, And I mean, for me, those types of moves have all been out of sheer desperation of these data center legacy kind of vendors trying to, keep up with the cloud and remain hip and trendy. And so on, kind of being with those communities and that crowd, so to speak. So I mean, NetApp is kind of you know, I mean, if anything, really, I would probably say the NetApp sort of move with, you know, Azure NetApp files, for example, in Microsoft Azure, is probably a better move, because it's this, you know, it's all the technology, it's all the knowledge of NetApp, you know, brought into Azure, and they've done the same. They've, you know, thrown their hardware over the fence in Azure, and that is actually called a Azure native first-party service. So Microsoft actually support and run that, but it's the NetApp technology.
Okay.
And that obviously means you can put anything on it. You can put your data on it, you can put your databases on it, you can put your apps on it, whatever you like on that. And that for me would be a, you know, for somebody who's kind of coming from the data and then maybe even a existing, you know, NetApp customer, would be a logical transition for them to, you know, to go into the cloud. And that would be a much better solution than kind of these very, you know, specific and proprietary kind of moves into the cloud.
Yeah, I think if you know what they're putting into the cloud, if two things. Firstly, does it perform in the same way that it would on our own systems? Does it is it open enough to, you know, to interact with everything else? Because otherwise, you know, this is really just wrapping something in cotton wool and putting it into the cloud is not really going to work. So does it interact, and does it have the sort of APIs and the tool sets around it that enable people to develop to it? And if you don't get the developer community developing to it, then, you know, it's not going to get the sort of traction that these guys seem to think they're going to get.
And Larry Ellison, unfortunately, in the press release, and this was in the quotes, I don't think it was wrong, unless there was a typo from the register or something, called it on-premise. And I was like, oh no, Larry, you committed the cardinal sin. It's on-premises.
It's exactly.
Or on-prem for short. It's not on-premise. That has a completely different meaning. So
yeah.
Dear viewers, if you're watching this and you've read the report, don't call it on-premise. It's on-premises or on-prem for short. So
the number of times I have to correct, you know, vendors on that is just amazing. I mean, right across the piece. It's just lazy, you know. It's just lazy.
It reminds me. I won't name any names of which company I was working for, and I'm not being sort of maybe, you know, sort of detailed as that person was, but it's just slightly along those kind of OCD lines of when somebody was presenting to us, and I was in this meeting with somebody, and we were in person together in the same room, and then the person said, well, do you have any thoughts on my slides, you know, in person? And then the other person said, yeah, you've missed a full stop here, you need a comma there and a dash on.
Yeah.
So this is not on that level, but you have to call it on-premises or on-prem for short. It's not on-premise. That has a different connotation.
Yeah, you can't get too pedantic, but there are times you can actually just spend a bit of time thinking about the language you use, you know, and we're getting so sloppy in the IT world about language.
We are. Okay, right. So that's that one. Now, let's move on to the second one, which was a report from Gartner called the Technology Adoption Roadmap. Now, I found this quite interesting, which is why I kind of, you know, suggested that we have a chat about it, because there were some interesting points. I think I picked on 3 or 4 main ones. There's a huge, I think, amount of data in there, so we'll make the links for all of this obviously available in the description of the video. But there was just a couple of things there that, for me, kind of resonated and reflected on other things that I'm seeing elsewhere as well. So I thought we'll pick on those. So I think the plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, the roadmap, kind of the way they've done the roadmap is a split into sort of data from 2022, data from, I think, this year, and a kind of a planned as well. So what our customers or enterprises planning kind of for the future. And I guess that's the roadmap aspect of, you know, of the report itself. So for me, the first one, if I may kind of go through, the first one I picked on was around data and analytics. And it said that 74% of those who were surveyed are piloting emerging technologies. And I assume that's generative AI and large language models right now. Maybe that's why they're so high.
I think there's I mean, you just look at the graphic that they use, the sort of mandala of circular mandala stuff, and you can see huge amounts of things going on in the piloting stage. But it sort of comes back, and you were talking about being at the big data show yesterday. One of the challenges I think people are running into is, enterprises are naturally cautious, they're naturally risk averse. And I think they've been running into problems, particularly in the data area, but one or two others we'll come back to, where the state of their data is not good enough for using a lot of these tools, particularly some of the analytics tools. If you're doing streaming analytics, or you're doing, some of the new stuff that's going on around there with AI enabled, it's the old garbage in, garbage out type routine. And I think there've been a number of pilots where they've struggled to get the quality of data in. So one of the challenges, is that, and it comes across here, their first key takeaway was business executives continue to have high expectations from their DNA capabilities, their data and analytics capabilities, even though emerging DNA technology adoption is in early stages. And it's so I think there is a big gap between the sort of hype's probably the wrong word, but the story going out that streaming analytics, real-time analytics, hey, we've got data warehouses and data lakes, and it's now going to be a darn sight easier to get the information you want than rather than the sort of trying to get out of a Oracle relational database and do all the structured stuff that you had to do around that. And the answer is yes, it should be, but we're running into a problem that there is so much data out there, and most companies don't even know where it is, let alone what quality it's in. And I think that's why we're getting a lot of pushback. So that's why a lot of piloting going on, and I think you'll see that probably for longer than Gartner thinks. I think people will be into the sort of pilot, find where the issues are, right? Okay, I need to think about how I organize my data. How do I want to, we'll go around those loops before you suddenly see a splurge of, or an acceleration of, cute applications coming along going, hey, I'm using the data in this way. So there's a lot of capability out there, but I think most enterprises have not got control of their data.
No, I would agree with that. And as I said, as you said, that was my impression from the Big Data London event, Big Data London show as well that I attended, and maybe more on that in the future. Kind of do a reflection on that. But the next bit that I picked up on, it said it was around infrastructure and operations in this Gartner report, and I found that ironic that it said only 4% of technologies are in the planning stage. So with one where they're saying, yes, we'd like to do that, 74%, but only 4% is actually being planned at all. So there's kind of a bit of a difference there between those two.
And this is not a surprise to me. I mean, every time I talk to IT operations teams, leaders, whoever, they're in the sort of running flat out to keep up mode at the moment, and cloud, far from making their lives easier, has made it harder, not because cloud is intrinsically harder than normal on-premises IT operations, but they're having to do it on top of that. So most enterprises have got a hybrid environment, and they've effectively more than doubled their workloads, and they're running around. I mean, the word I keep hearing a number of times is death by 1,000 cuts, and they don't mean financial cuts, they mean paper cuts.
Right.
Number of times you draw blood with silly little things that are going on. If you do it 1,000 times, you die. And they're in that sort of mode, and therefore they're sort of running really hard to find out what to do. So it wasn't a sort of surprise that they were doing sort of the simple, easy things that were going to make life easier. And if you look at the mandala again, unified endpoint management, team collaboration devices, desktop as a service, unified endpoint security. I mean, that will come back to security because that seems to be one of the overarching issues. And some of the other more esoteric stuff. I was, a little disappointed that open telemetry was a very small dot right on the edge of the sort of pilot, pilot phase. You're thinking, hold on a minute, guy. But that's the problem with the mindset, is that it's back to, we may have used the analogy in this before, and I apologize to the audience if we have, but it's the machine gun salesman turning up at the back door of a tent of a medieval king, going, have I got the answer for you? And he's saying, don't bother me now, I've got a battle to fight. And
that's a good one. I like that one. I don't think I get bored with that one, Paul. So
it's great. And this is a sort of classic. There are a number of things out there that could really make IT operations lives easier. Getting their mind share at the moment is quite difficult.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so the next one is around security and risk management, which I picked up on, or the SRM, I think, as the report called it. And it said 80% expect an increase in their cybersecurity budget going forward. Now, I can understand that, but I have news for them. They can also expect an increase in the amount of cybersecurity attacks in the future as well. Maybe that has something to do with the budget increase as well. That was kind of my take on that.
Yeah, mine too. It's going to get. I mean, the attack surface. People think it's back to this putting stuff into the cloud. I think people took their eye off the ball in terms of who's responsible for security. I think we've got past that. Now they know they are. I mean, AWS make it quite clear we are responsible for the security of the cloud. The customer is responsible for security in the cloud.
In the cloud, exactly.
So you have to get a much tighter control over identity and access management, for example. All those sort of things need a much and you've got a much wider attack surface these days. So yes, of course you're going to have to, you've got working from home. You work with other partners in your supply chains, and all those points have weaknesses. So absolutely, but again, yes, bigger budgets, but my goodness me, more attacks coming.
Yeah, and this is again, cloud security is. Not only fundamental, but it's one of those kind of primitive, things that you need to really kind of focus on, and there's so many ways we can, go into it to talk about, and maybe we'll cover that in the future. There is a kind of a chart that I saw on LinkedIn recently, which was very good and kind of gave you this sort of the iceberg and what lies beneath the water type of thing, and it was very much about sort of security of the cloud and security in the cloud, as you said.
And obviously things like data at rest and data in motion. How do you secure data in motion before it gets to the cloud? Those sort of issues. And I don't.
Larry says we don't have to do that anymore because it's all over the fence now. Oracle and Microsoft.
But it's sort of you've still got people outside, working from home, working in even in your offices who are going to transfer information across the internet. Now, are most hackers going to break into the internet to try and get it? No, but if you don't do some sensible things around the security of routers and switches and all those sort of things that are not in the cloud, but probably your responsibility, then I think so yes, it's a major issue. And certain industries, of course, it's critical. Financial services, healthcare, all those are going to have really, really critical requirements. So yes, their budgets will need to get bigger. I agree, and I think we'll maybe look at security. Like I said, we'll maybe look at that chart in the future, because I think, my opinion is that you need to have that level of strategy, and it needs to be at the strategy level when it comes to doing cloud. Understand the technology, make sure that the tech guys understand the tech and what the implications of
zero trust and all that kind of stuff in the cloud versus what you've been used to doing, in the data center, but then kind of pull back on that or kind of, look at the overall picture, because there's so many things on so many layers of the cloud that you need to have security on.
Yeah, I think, you need to get the message across to senior management, not IT management, but senior business leaders, that putting it into the cloud doesn't take the issue away.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, oh, it's more secure in the cloud. Well, yes,
to a degree.
To what we've talked about,
Yeah.
yes, in terms of security of the cloud, but
Yeah.
in the cloud, it's still your responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. And it's often, I think, that sort of thing is not considered and it's bypassed. And the report, I think, makes that quite clear in terms of the data that it's showing there. And I don't really see a huge amount of change on that. I'm still seeing people misunderstanding that and not really getting the bigger picture. And every time I see something, when somebody says, we need to shift left, whenever I hear the word shift left, I always think, you missed something, and now you're having to go back and correct it. So, when we did DevOps, then we forgot about the software supply chain, so we did DevSecOps. When people talk about security in the cloud, they say shift left your security right. So you missed out on all of those things that you should have basically done in your architecture for your cloud. So I don't really see shift left as a positive thing in terms of the where it is in that sort of time period. It to me, it says you've missed something out and now you're going back to correct it. It's the right thing to do, but it's a bit kind of after the event, so to speak.
Yeah, we've touched on it in the past. I mean, the agile nature of DevOps, the agile nature of the technologies that we've now got, the way in which we're doing distributed applications, has meant that you're running ahead of the ability of organizations, whether it's enterprises or governments, to deal with some of the other implications. And the whole idea of enterprise architecture it's not flown out the window, but it's not got the role that it used to have.
Yeah.
And again, people are just, develop this, develop that, develop the, and as you say, it all comes later. And I think there's a sort of reckoning. And every now, and you need a few really awful, events, whether it's, the police service in Northern Ireland, recently and everything that happened there, or others to say, you've got to build that security in early.
Yes,
you've got to be part of the, and particularly if it's critical to your business.
Agreed. Okay, so the fourth one I picked up on was software engineering, and it said the high cost is the primary risk for 68% of those interviewed or surveyed of new technologies. So new technology seems to be posing a high risk factor, or a primary risk factor for 68% of them in terms of its high cost.
I think it's as much to do with two things that sort of strike me about that. Is one is it's a skills issue. So if you're going for that, you're going to have to get the latest skill sets from people. And therefore you either have to train your own or you have to try and buy people in, and we've seen certain technologies where median salaries are going through the roof because there's a shortage. So that's number one. The second is I think is the integration issue, that they do these things and sort of, yes, it's easy to get a new app out there, but then if you've got to integrate it with the rest of your architecture, so it's not as simple as they think. If you've got a simple little application that doesn't need a lot of integration, then okay, fine. But and it's the cost of supporting this environment. It's not because a lot of it is open source, so it shouldn't be. It shouldn't cost you a lot to start with. But getting the right people and then supporting it afterwards is going to be a complex. It shouldn't be complicated, but it will be a complex environment.
I agree, and I was just wondering. I don't know if can't remember if the report kind of delved into it a little bit more, or kind of went there, but I'm wondering whether this was looking at sort of the overall picture. It's the high cost of moving into these new technologies for software engineering. Let's not forget the category, is because of that sort of barrier, that pain barrier that enterprises have to go through when they move from the old way of developing applications to the kind of more agile DevOps-y way of developing. And in that space, we've seen even DevOps being challenged recently with things like GitOps, platform engineering, SRE, things like that. Those are all encroaching. Again, there's a really great diagram. I will share that with you that somebody put on, posted on LinkedIn, which kind of gives you the interaction between 3 or 4 of those disciplines and methodologies. So to your point about skill, that goes back to the people, process, technology thing, right? It's that cultural change.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they're calling it a high cost, because it is a high cost. And I keep saying that to my customers that, look, if you're going to do this, you need to do it properly, and it's going to cost you a fortune. As simple as that.
Geoffrey Moore, who was the Crossing the Chasm guru, if you've never come across Crossing the Chasm, he wrote a book called Dealing with Darwin, which was how do you deal with these changes going on? And it was the antithesis, if you like, if we're talking Gartner, of bimodal. Gartner talked about bimodal IT, which created 2 completely separate worlds. And now we're challenged with the issue that you need to bring those 2 worlds together, and you haven't brought the people along with you.
Yes.
You've left your legacy engineers, your legacy developers, having to make an enormous leap rather than helping them step through technologies to get to where they need to be. So again, there's a cost to enterprises in terms of retention of their staff, in terms of retraining and reskilling.
Correct.
And bringing them along with you. So yes, so when you talk about the cost, everybody, your initial thought is, well, it shouldn't be more expensive because it's cheaper to develop applications in a modern world than it ever was in the old world. But that's what we've been talking about, means why I think it's expensive.
Yeah, I think that's part of the move. So was there anything else in the report that kind of caught your eye, Paul? Is anything else of interest?
Not really. I mean, bless you, you only gave me about 12 hours to look at it, and eight of those I was asleep. So I mean, so I think it's probably worth us coming back to it when we've had a deeper dive.
Yeah,
but nothing in there struck me as being particularly earth-shattering. I don't think Gartner intended it to be earth-shattering. But I think what it does do is highlights the number of different areas that IT teams, whether they're operations or whether they're developers, are having to get to grips with in this new environment. Somebody I was talking to at a place called Wing Cloud said it is like taking a box of Lego and throwing it all over the floor and saying, right, now go build something, and you realize you've just built what you did first time, right? It's almost you've just built exactly what we used to. Go build something new, and you build exactly what you did before. It's really difficult because it's difficult getting a roadmap through that. We talk about roadmaps, a route map. It's very difficult for enterprises to make the space to do this.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe we can kind of cover a little bit more detail of it in the future, talk as well. I think that might be interesting. It depends on kind of the content and what else is coming up. Okay, so our third topic is, could AI break the cloud? Now, when you came up with this, I gave you multiple scenarios or responses. I don't know if any of those kind of hit the mark or whatever, but I'd like to hear your kind of take on this first, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think AI is going to provide, a real challenge for, I think it's for data center operators almost more than the cloud. But I think, if you think AWS and Azure and GCP are effectively, data center operators, whether they like it or not, the workloads that you're going to get from AI, and this idea of, where do I train them? Where do I run them? If you try and train your workloads in the cloud and you're having to ship data in and out, that's one particular problem. Again, if you run AI in the cloud and are you shipping data in and out, there's a cost element to data egress and ingress charges, but there's also a network, availability. And as I said, I think, talking to, somebody on a sort of round table I was on the other day, and they were running sort of their AI training on Azure, and were getting throttled. Again, I wasn't quite sure whether that throttling was coming directly from Azure throttling them back, or whether it was the network throttling them back, but they were looking at having to bring their training in-house. And of course, the idea was always that, well, hold on a minute, most people can't afford the capital expense of doing AI training in-house. Therefore, the idea of doing training in the cloud was really good. But this particular guy, from a fairly sizable organization, was going, actually, financially, it's probably going to make more sense for us to bring it back in-house. So that's one angle. The other angle, and we've talked a little bit before we came on this call about maybe in future looking at sustainability in the cloud, is the amount of energy that this is going to take to run these things. And it's not just the sort of raw processing power; it's cooling it as well.
I think some states in the US and some maybe counties in the UK were just going to say, sorry, we can't supply you any more electricity for this month because we got to run some more, large language models or something. So,
well, I mean, two places come to mind in Europe. I mean, Amsterdam has put a moratorium on new data centers. And had for a couple of years. So you can sort of add capacity inside existing data centers. But the other one is Ireland. I mean, real debates in Ireland about whether, particularly in the Dublin area, whether they've got the grid to support it. So I think, those are the sort of challenges. They're not necessarily, it doesn't kill the cloud. I mean, that was slightly naughty, sort of catch people's eye. I don't think
that's okay. We don't mind some sensationalism on this channel.
but I think there are some real issues around sustainability. I mean, one of the things that struck me really hard, I was watching a piece on sustainability, and data center cooling. Sorry, this might sound off the record, but or off the wall a little bit. But there's a guy called Dr. John Summers who works at the Research Institutes of Sweden, RISE. They're sort of leading experts. I mean, he's a Brit. He's done a lot of work with the University of Leeds and University of Sheffield. But the metric that got me, a lot of his stuff is way over my head, in terms of thermal energy and those sort of things. But one of the things that absolutely struck me was that if you go above 20 or 25 kilowatts a rack, the amount of cool air you need to throw across that, you would have wind speeds of 40 kilometers an hour inside your data center. I mean, he had all the stats to back it up.
You might as well do some aerodynamic modeling while you're at it.
Exactly. But you think of all the cost and of trying to generate that much cool air in a data center, crazy. So different. So I just think, and there's a new company out there called CoreWeave, who started as Bitcoin miners. And they're now a US company, and they're now building, they've actually got a huge amount of funding. And they're building out data centers rapidly to do HPC, to do AI and HPC specifically, because the challenge of housing those really highly dense configurations means that you can't use your existing space very effectively. So there's a real, we're all going, hey, AI, great. But the implication from a cost and sort of just physical location point of view says this could get quite difficult. Now, I'm sure AWS and Azure and all the others are, well aware of that and planning for the future. But there is a real potential, if this AI hype wave that's going on at the moment carries on going, then, there's going to be some cost and sustainability issues around it. So, and the network, I mean, yes, clearly, there's a limit to how much you can put across the network. Again, we're seeing IoT saying, and we're starting to talk about take the processing to the data, not the data to the processing.
Yeah.
So you may see, certainly the way in which the cloud looks in terms of its, configuration, quite different than it looks today to get over those issues. I mean, you and I might argue about whether that's cloud or not. We've had that debate about whether edge cloud is
ongoing,
ongoing debate. But that's the sort of things that says, AI, IoT, if you put AI, and they're putting AI into the edge, this is going to make real challenges for networks, real challenges for data centers. And I think it's just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, more kind of around capacity and energy, supply and not a AI sort of getting a new order of intelligence and then we have to pull the plug on it or something.
No.
That wasn't your
it wasn't
term for break.
It wasn't my intent. No,
that wasn't your meaning. Yeah.
I'm definitely not in the AI is going to kill us routine. But the pressure it will put on the infrastructure is going to be intriguing.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely on the power, definitely on the space as well.
Yeah.
So I suspect we will see some new services that will help to alleviate that. And I don't mean just kind of, Microsoft putting OpenAI's sort of, capabilities with ChatGPT, whatever, in Azure and just saying, well, there's the API, kind of go and use it. Who's using that? Nobody's using that. It's there and it's coming. There's more services coming, but nobody's kind of utilizing that at that level. I would like to see kind of more facilitation of those things that we require, so that we almost kind of get AI to a PaaS kind of level, to kind of a middleware sort of level, and then we can start utilizing it. Kind of a PaaS AI or AI PaaS kind of thing, something like that. Because you can't just kind of say, well, here's all the open source tools, is kind of how you can do the models, here's a bit of storage, in Blob or whatever, and here's some compute, now go and put it all together. Or here's just an API and just use us as an API, or here's a SaaS solution, because that's not necessarily going to be for everybody. People want to kind of, weave their own, sort of AI platforms and models, but at the same time, they don't want to reinvent the wheel every single time. They maybe want to bring in some capability, some functionality that's already pre-baked, right?
But again, this still raises the issue of where do you run the PaaS?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How do you do all those? So I'm with you. I think there will be definitely a level of maturity that comes in that says, actually, I don't need to worry about all the plumbing. I don't need to worry about all the the sort of development platform on top. I can just do my work. Back to the same thing that we're seeing in all the other areas. Make it easy and agile to do the development. But it will cause more problems or more potential issues than we've seen currently. I mean, I can remember going back when I was looking at sort of data centers in sort of 2007, 2008, and people were then saying, we could have 10 kilowatts a rack, and it's going to be hard, we're way past that now. Suddenly, and it took a long time to happen, but we're past that. You're now heading towards 20 kilowatts a rack, and beyond. And some of the things coming down the track from Intel and NVIDIA and ARM and other people in terms of, the power of the microprocessors they're putting together. You think you've reached the limit, but we haven't anywhere near.
Yeah, and I think we're still in that sort of early phase of excitement and stuff around AI. So I think some of that may sort of subside, and then you'll be kind of, the dust will settle, things will calm down, and then you'll kind of see a little bit clearer as to where things can go forward in the the future. But I would like to see not just kind of this raw ability to do AI, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud or whatever. I'd like to see some more facilitation, like I said, some more of that sort of PaaS functionality, that sort of middleware being offered as well, so it makes it easier for people to build. And not just, as I said, sure, you can do SaaS with that, so you can do kind of as a software as a service, and just bring me your data and I'll do the rest kind of approach, and that's fine. Or at the other end of that spectrum, to kind of do it programmatically, with APIs and things like that. But I'd like to see that sort of literal middle area, that middleware, but that PaaS also being offered as well. And I've not seen enough of that yet.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not seeing enough of that, and I think it will probably be. I would, stick my neck out and say there'll be more PaaS than SaaS, because I actually
that would be good. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, because I think, when you look at where AI is going to be deployed and how it's going to be deployed, for most enterprises, it will be the way in which they differentiate their services.
Yeah.
The ability to do that over the course of time. If they haven't got that capability, differentiation and the ability to move quickly will fast disappear. They will become a commodity. So I think, you'll see people wanting to have control over that last bit of how do I, build an AI model for my company, my organization, my market.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm glad by the word break, you didn't mean kind of, AI overtaking or nuking us all or something like that.
No, absolutely. And even if it managed to break the internet or the cloud, we'd still be here. You're right. I am not one of the, oh God, HAL's going to destroy us tomorrow.
The doom and gloom of the press, indeed, of the press, indeed. Okay, well, I think we've reached the end of our discussion. We'll probably go on chatting for ages, and we did chat for ages before we did the recording, actually. But so I think that's about it for this particular episode. Thanks again to Paul for all your insights. Appreciate them as always. Always interesting to have conversation with you around all these topics. All the links for everything that we've discussed, all the topics, we'll try and cram as much of that as we can, as usual, into the description of the video. So please do check that out, because there's lots of information you can go and reference from that for kind of your own strategy and your own sort of individual knowledge as well. Thank you all for watching, and we'll hopefully see you soon. See you next time.
Yes, guys.
Thank you for watching this talk. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, share, like, and subscribe to support the channel. You may also want to check out some of the other videos on this channel. See you next time.